Think you've got mom issues? Try being Richard the Lionheart. Long before he was even born, everyone in Europe was already gossiping about his mom, and not in a good way. Actually, never in a good way. So it's 1152. What's a respectable divorced queen supposed to do? Well, she should mope around and join a convent, at least if you ask a divorced king. But Eleanor of Aquitaine apparently never got that memo. Instead of repenting and instead of apologizing for the tragedy of giving the King of France not a son, but 2 daughters. What a shame. She went and remarried, and not just to anyone, but to the King of England. All right, marrying the King of England. Maybe Louis VII could have prayed that one away. He was a good Christian man, after all. But marrying the King of England, who also happened to be his vassal, now that was a slap in the face. First, you're the Duke of Normandy or the Count of Anjou, so you bow and scrape to the French king. Then, by sheer luck and some bloody conquest, you also snag the throne of England. Congratulations, you're a king. But if you still want to keep Normandy or Anjou, you keep on bowing to France, and so do your kids. Basically, want to stay alive? Learn to juggle. That's what Henry II Plantagenet did, and his greatest trick was marrying Eleanor of Aquitaine, his boss's ex-wife. Louis VII, the boss, wasn't thrilled. He'd married Eleanor when she was just 15, but after 15 years, still no boys, and now she was 30, which, by medieval standards, made her basically a grandma. To be clear, we're speaking in 12th century terms. 200 years later, Chaucer would write, "There's no juice left in a girl once she's over 20. Medieval men were truly poets, and Eleanor wasted no time proving Louis wrong. With Henry, she had son after son. Boom, Richard, the future Lionheart. Boom, John, the future Lackland. Boom, 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 5 sons in total. And when people asked her, "What on earth were you doing for 15 years of marriage to the King of France?" Eleanor coolly replied, "Well, I was married more to a monk than to a man." That insult won't die. 2 centuries later, it explodes. But that's another video. For now, back to Eleanor. Eleanor was 30. Her brand new husband, 19. Even today, people might raise an eyebrow at that. But 9 centuries ago, it was jaw-dropping. Europe was in shock. And yet, what had Eleanor already managed to do by the time she hit 30? She'd been Queen of France. She'd given France 2 princesses. She'd gone on crusade with her husband. She'd divorced him. She'd become Queen of England. And most importantly, she held on to her dowry, the fabulously rich and glamorous Aquitaine. Compared to her native Aquitaine, Paris had felt like a provincial dump. London, even worse. But Eleanor didn't sulk. She got busy producing heirs for the English throne. 5 sons, as we've said already, plus 3 daughters. Basically, for the next 15 years, she was permanently pregnant. Meanwhile, her adoring husband Henry was constantly on the road across his sprawling empire, leaving her as regent in London. Not exactly a light workload. And Henry, to be fair, had his own side projects, mostly involving other women. Let's just say husband number 2 was no angel. In fact, he was kind of the opposite. At the time, people in Europe were already joking that the Plantagenets were descended from a French nobleman and the literal daughter of Satan. When Henry tied the knot with Eleanor, she was already 30. 15 years later, she was even older. And after 8 kids, the romance had cooled off. Eleanor retreated to Aquitaine, doting on her favorite son, Richard. He didn't know he was Lionheart yet, but his mom sure did. Meanwhile, Henry Plantagenet, who had never learned the word share, was driving his co-king and son, Henry the Young King, absolutely crazy. Young Henry rebelled, ran off to Paris and found refuge with, wait for it, Louis VII, his mother's first husband. Awkward doesn't even cover it. Now, we can't be sure Eleanor egged him on, but it's easy to imagine her saying something like, "Well, your dad's gone completely mad. Look at him." And sure enough, her darling Richard, future Lionheart, soon joined the rebellion. Henry didn't take this well. He locked Eleanor up for the next 15 years, so she could think about her behavior. But let's be clear, this wasn't county jail. She lived in castles with servants, wealth, and comfort. The only drawback was, it's harder to plot your husband's downfall when you're under guard. Henry the young king didn't last much longer. He died, still bitter. Again, we can't prove Eleanor whispered in her surviving son's ears, but it's easy to imagine her saying, "Your dad's really gone downhill. Locked me up, won't step aside from the throne." Eventually, even Henry's favorite son, John Lackland, turned against him. That was the final straw. Henry had a stroke and died. And now Eleanor's beloved flower, Richard the Lionheart, became king. First thing Richard did, send word to England, "Release my mother," and listen to her in everything. Eleanor walked free at the height of her power, but she had no idea that the real troubles were only just beginning. Richard set off at once for the Crusade. He told his mom, "You've got this," and sailed away from England. A hopeless king, but my God, the man could fight. That's why they called him Lionheart. Supposedly his soldiers gave him the name. He ruled England for 10 years, actually set foot there for maybe 5 or 6 months total. But that was fine, because Mom knew best. Richard treated England like a cash cow, just a source of taxes to pay for his ridiculously expensive wars. Even though he spent insane amounts of money and kept losing chunks of his kingdom while fighting in the Holy Land, hardly anyone rebelled against him. Why? Because in the Middle Ages, this was considered the perfect king. He was a crusader, a holy warrior, the kind of guy you'd brag about to your neighbors. See? Our king is basically God's favorite. One time during a crusade, Richard noticed a banner hanging next to his own flag. "What's that rag doing here?" he asked. It turned out to be the banner of Leopold of Austria, a serious man, not some nobody. Richard ordered it taken down immediately, so it wouldn't dare hang next to his glorious flag. And that's how Leopold arrived later, only to see his banner lying in the dirt, with soldiers stomping all over it. "Excuse me, what exactly is this?" he asked. The answer, "Oh, that's Richard." And Richard also said, "You don't understand anything about crusading." By sheer coincidence, of course, when Richard was returning home through Europe, he was greeted by Leopold's troops. "Remember that little incident in the Crusade when you trampled on our Lord's banner? Well then, try trampling on this." And so Richard the Lionheart was taken hostage. And after all those crushing taxes, after more than a decade of endless levies, England, managed by Eleanor, scraped together a nearly impossible ransom of 150,000 marks. They managed it, but barely. You could say that was pretty much Richard's last act as King of England. Sometime later, in a rather stupid situation, he took a crossbow bolt to the shoulder and died. So the crown passed to John Lackland, Henry's favorite and Eleanor's least favorite son. Eleanor sat through a bit of the coronation and basically said, "Mom doesn't need to be here. Mom doesn't know a thing. I'll do what I love best." And off she went, to her glamorous, wealthy Aquitaine, to party it up. She was 77 after all, and a little vacation was well deserved. But this time, Mom knew nothing. Spoiler, she kicked back a little too early. A few years later, one of her grandsons laid siege to her castle, and Eleanor, now in her 80s, had to personally organize the defense. But she still had one unfinished project. Remember her first husband, Louis VII of France, the guy she said was more monk than man. After divorcing Eleanor, he remarried, twice, First wife gave him 2 daughters. Second wife gave him 2 daughters. Third wife finally gave him a son, Philip II Augustus. Philip had a son too, Louis VIII. Since things didn't work out with Louis VII, Eleanor turned her attention to Louis VIII. They didn't call her the grandmother of medieval Europe for nothing. Even while imprisoned by Henry II, Eleanor arranged 2 excellent marriages for her daughters, one to the King of Sicily, the other to the King of Castile. Now she traveled to Castile herself. There she found her granddaughter and personally escorted the girl across the Pyrenees to France to marry the future Louis VIII. So, how far ahead are you planning your family's future? Drop it in the comments and ring the bell so you won't miss where history goes next.